So, welcome everyone. I'm Arielle Cates. I'm the Director of Programming at Village Preservation, and I'm so glad and grateful that you're all here with us this evening. Just a quick bit about Village Preservation. We have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs a year, most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural heritage, history, and depth, and the value of preservation in our communities. We are a nonprofit membership-based organization, so your involvement and support mean the world to us. You can learn more at our website, villagepreservation.org, and please consider becoming a member or making a donation if you're able at villagepreservation.org/donate. So I have a little bit more to tell you about this evening's talk, but we're going to take this very special moment to welcome my colleague, Lanelle Stevens, our Director of Development, who's here to tell us about Village Voices, which is the occasion for this evening's event. Lanelle, welcome.
Thank you, Arielle. Thank you so much for creating all of your astonishingly wonderful programming, all of it. It's such a joy, but also particularly for taking the time to create programming surrounding Village Voices, which is something new for us this year. Village Voices is an outdoor art exhibition celebrating people, places, and moments from our neighborhood's history, inspiring us forward on the road ahead. We're creating Village Voices to benefit village preservation, but also as a tribute to our community and to the public as we celebrate the reopening of our neighborhoods. Our exhibition will be open for several weeks for our friends and neighbors and visitors to discover and enjoy, and we are so thrilled to be opening it on September the 12th. It'll run for a few weeks, so please join us.
So amazing. Yes, and all of the works that we are reading this evening are by writers and musicians, artists, poets who are being featured in Village Voices. So we're just so glad to get to be celebrating all of those folks and their incredible work together with all of these incredible folks. So
such an honor.
Yes. So thanks for that, Lanelle. Just a bit of Zoom protocol. Not all of us will always be visible during the event, but we're here. So please feel free to use the chat to say hi and tell us where you're joining from, or to raise any issues or share any thoughts or anything like that. So I am very, very delighted tonight to be joined by our amazing readers, Penny Arcade, Elinor Nauen, Jared Daniel Fagen, Kristy Raffensberger, Lanelle Stevens, Noland, and accompanist Oliver, Shelly Marlow, and Therese Sloboda, and our wonderful co-hosts for the evening, the Merchants House Museum, the Poetry Brothel, the Poetry Project, the Hudson Park Library, the Jefferson Market Library, and the Tompkins Square Library, all three of the libraries in our neighborhood. There's so much information about these incredible folks and organizations, and I could talk to you about them for the whole rest of the evening. But we do have a packed lineup, so I'm going to put right now in the chat for all of you a link to a program for tonight's event, which otherwise I would be giving it to you on paper, but here we are virtual. This lists all of the information and links about each of our readers and each of our partnering organizations. So please do take some time to peruse and enjoy this for us. So I am very, very delighted to turn this over to our first reader, Teresa. Thanks so much. Take it away, Therese.
All right. Thank you so much, Arielle. I'm delighted to present E.E. Cummings, my way, as it were. In 1927, E.E. Cummings wrote to the subject of my biography, Anything That Burns You, Lola Ridge, Radical Poet. This was while Ridge was an editor of one of the leading modernist magazines, and of course, another villager. The letter included the line, I don't know, in other words, Cummings wrote, I don't know whether or no you have time to introduce these sensual integers of mine to people who'd like to publish them. So very ingratiating. However, I don't think she published any. They did share an anti-war stance, his as a result of his service during and just before World War I. To counter the usual perception of Cummings' work as a kind of silly and lightweight, I'm reading his I Sing of Olaf Glad and Big, a very graphic poem about the death of a conscientious objector. I sing of Olaf glad and big, whose warmest heart recoiled at war, a conscientious objector, his well-beloved colonel, Trig, West Pointer, most succinctly bred, took erring Olaf soon in hand, but though a host of overjoyed non-coms first knocking on the head him, do through icy waters roll that helplessness, which others stroke with brushes, recently employed anent this muddy toilet bowl. While kindred intellects evoke allegiance per blunt instruments. Olaf, being to all intents a corpse, and wanting any rag upon what God unto him gave, responds without getting annoyed, I will not kiss your fucking flag. Straightway the silver bird looked grave, departing hurriedly to shave. But though all kinds of officers, a yearning nation's blue-eyed pride, their passive prey did kick and curse until for wear their clarion voices and boots were much the worse, and egged the first-class privates on his rectum, wickedly to tease, by means of skillfully applied bayonets, roasted hot with heat. Olaf, upon what once were knees, does almost ceaselessly repeat, there is some shit I will not eat. Our president, being of which assertions duly notified, threw the yellow son of a bitch into a dungeon where he died. Christ, of his mercy infinite, I pray to see, and Olaf too, preponderatingly, because unless statistics lie, he was more brave than me, more blonde than you. Despite Edna St. Vincent Millay, who wrote in her Guggenheim endorsement of his work, here is a big talent in the hands of an arrogant, peevish, self-satisfied, and self-indulgent writer. He was still, after all, a penniless poet in the village who took his chances. He lived in a tiny apartment at Patchen Place near West 4th Street from 1924 to 1962. This is the story from Susan Cheever's biography about the time he had to get home one night but didn't have the fare. Cummings and Marion, who was his girlfriend for many years, literally penniless, used their last 2 tokens to take the subway uptown from Patchen Place to a fabulous New Year's Eve party. They were dressed to the nines, she long-legged in a spectacular evening gown, and he in a glamorous gentleman's top hat and tails. The night was freezing cold. How would they get home? Neither of them worried at all as they dazzled the partygoers and had the time of their lives. In the elevator on their way home in the early morning, the airy, beautiful couple noticed a leaden banker and his stodgy wife. They were all a little drunk on champagne. The banker admired Cummings's beautiful hat. Sir, asked Cummings in his educated accent, what would you give for the privilege of stepping on it? The banker paid $10, the hat collapsed on cue, and Cummings and Marion took a cab back to Patchen Place. One of the many interesting things that Cummings wrote was the introduction to the first collection of George Harriman's Crazy Cat comics. Harriman was America's first Black American cartoonist, and he was America's first Black cartoonist, and the strip that ran many decades in Hearst's newspapers. The plot was, in Cummings's words, dog hates mouse and worships cat. Mouse despises cat and hates dog. Cat hates no one and loves mouse. Love is the topic of the second and last poem I'll read, and a favorite of Cummings. As freedom is a breakfast food. As freedom is a breakfast food, or truth can live with right and wrong, or molehills are from mountains made, long enough and just so long, will being pay the rent of seam, and genius please the talent gang, and water most encouraged flame? As hat racks into peaches grow, or hopes dance best on bald men's hair, on bald men's hair, and every finger is a toe, and any courage is a fear. Long enough and just so long, will the impure think all things pure, and hornets wail by children stung? Or as the seeing are the blind, and robins never welcome spring, nor flat folk prove their world is round, nor dingsters die at break of dawn, and commons rare and millstones float, long enough and just so long. Tomorrow will not be too late. Worms are the words, but joy's the voice. Down shall go which, and up come who. Breasts will be breasts, thighs will be thighs. Deeds cannot dream what dreams can do. Time is a tree, this life one leaf. But love is the sky, and I am for you, just so long and long enough. Thank you. And our next reader is, I've lost track. The next reader will take over.
And that would be me,
It's
Elinor Nauen.
Eleanor.
Hi, everybody. Wow, this is so great. I feel so happy to be part of this group of both readers and artists from the area, and to be part of the area. I'm going to read two poems by W.H. Auden, who lived for many, many years at 77 St. Mark's Place, where La Palapa is now. And I just found out that long before he lived there, there was a Russian newspaper, and one of the staff writers was Trotsky at 77 St. Mark's Place. So I'm going to read first a poem called In Schrafts. And Schrafts was a chain of sort of lunch counters or restaurants. And I know there was one at 13th and 5th, possibly others in the neighborhood, I'm not so sure. So this is In Schrafts. Having finished the blue plate special and reached the coffee stage, stirring her cup, she sat, a somewhat shapeless figure of indeterminate age in an undistinguished hat. When she lifted her eyes, it was plain that our globular furor, our international rout of sin and apparatus and dying men galore, was not being bothered about. Which of the seven heavens was responsible? Her smile wouldn't be sure, but attested that, whoever it was, a God worth kneeling to for a while, had tabernacled and rested. So that's from the collected poems. That poem was from 1947. And the second poem I'm going to read was written in 1940. And for some reason, it's not in the collected poems, which just goes to show that poets don't always have a good idea of which poems work, do they? Refugee Blues. Say this city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions. Some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear. Yet there's no place for us. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now. In the village churchyard, there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can't do that, my dear. Old passports can't do that. The consul banged the table and said, if you've got no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear, but we are still alive. Went to a committee. They offered me a chair, asked me politely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? But where shall we go today? Came to a public meeting. The speaker got up and said, if we let them in, they will steal our daily bread. He was talking of you and me. My dear, he was talking of you and me. Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying they must die. We were in his mind, my dear. We were in his mind. Saw a poodle in a jacket fastened with a pin. Saw a door opened and a cat let in. But they weren't German Jews, my dear, but they weren't German Jews. Went down the harbor and stood upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away. Walked through a wood, saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear, they weren't the human race. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows, and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear, not one of them was ours. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow. 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear, looking for you and me. And next up, Jared Daniel Fagen. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for everyone for being here, and Village Preservation for your efforts and support of local artists, past, present, and future. I'm going to read a poem and also an excerpt from an essay by James Baldwin. Amen. No, I don't feel death coming. I feel death going, having thrown up his hands for the moment. I feel like I know him better than I did. Those arms held me for a while, and when we meet again, there will be that secret knowledge between us. And this is an excerpt from Everybody's Protest novel, which I won't preface, but I hope if you haven't read it, you will. Our passion for categorization, life neatly fitted into pegs, has led to an unforeseen paradoxical distress, confusion, a breakdown of meaning. Those categories which were meant to define and control the world for us have boomeranged us into chaos, in which limbo we whirl, clutching the straws of our definitions. But unless one's ideal of society is a race of neatly analyzed, hard-working ciphers, one can hardly claim for the protest novels the lofty purpose they claim for themselves or share the present optimism concerning them. They emerge for what they are, a mirror of our confusion, dishonesty, panic, trapped and immobilized in the sunlit prison of the American dream. They are fantasies connecting nowhere with reality, sentimental, in exactly the same sense that such movies as the best years of our lives, or the works of Mr. James M. Cain are fantasies. It is the peculiar triumph of society and its loss that it is able to convince those people to whom it has given inferior status of the reality of this decree. It has the force and the weapons to translate its dictum into fact, so that the allegedly inferior are actually made so, insofar as the societal realities are concerned. This is a more hidden phenomenon now than it was in the days of serfdom, but is no less implacable. Now, as then, we find ourselves bound, first without, then within, by the nature of our categorization. And escape is not effected through a bitter railing against this trap. It is as though this very striving were the only motion needed to spring the trap upon us. We take our shape, it is true, within and against that cage of reality bequeathed us at our birth. And yet it is precisely through our dependence on this reality that we are most endlessly betrayed. Society is held together by our need. We bind it together with legend, myth, coercion, fearing that without it, we will be hurled into that void within which, like the earth before the word was spoken, the foundations of society are hidden. From this void, ourselves, it is the function of society to protect us, but it is only this void, our unknown selves, demanding forever a new act of creation, which can save us from the evil that is in the world. With the same motion at the same time, it is this toward which we endlessly struggle and from which endlessly we struggle to escape. It must be remembered that the oppressed and the oppressor are bound together within the same society. They accept the same criteria, they share the same beliefs, they both alike depend on the same reality. Within this cage, it is romantic, more meaningless to speak of a new society as the desire of the oppressed, for that shivering dependence on the props of reality which he shares with the Herrenvolk makes a truly new society impossible to conceive. What is meant by a new society is one in which inequalities will disappear, in which vengeance will be exacted. Either there will be no oppressed at all, or the oppressed and the oppressor will change places. But finally, as it seems to me, what the rejected desire is an elevation of status, acceptance within the present community. Thus, the African, exile, pagan, hurried off the auction block and into the fields, fell on his knees before that God in whom he must now believe, who had made him, but not in his image. This tableau, this impossibility is the heritage of the Negro in America. Wash me, cried the slave to his maker, and I shall be whiter, whiter than snow. For black is the color of evil. Only the robes of the saved are white. It is this cry, implacable on the air and in the skull, that he must live with. Beneath the widely published catalog of brutality, bringing to mind somehow an image, a memory of church bells burdening the air, is this reality which, in the same nightmare notion, he both flees and rushes to embrace. In America now, this country devoted to the death of paradox, which may therefore be put to death by one, his lot is as ambiguous as a tableau by Kafka. To flee or not, to move or not, it is all the same. His doom is written on his forehead. It is carried in his heart. Thus has the cage betrayed us all. This moment, our life, turned to nothing through our terrible attempts to ensure it. For Bigger's tragedy is not that he is cold or black or hungry, not even that he is American, black, but that he has accepted a theology that denies him life, that he admits the possibility of his being subhuman and feels constrained, therefore, to battle for his humanity according to those brutal criteria bequeathed him at his birth. But our humanity is our burden, our life. We need not battle for it. We need only to do what is infinitely more difficult, that is, accept it. The failure of the protest novel lies in its rejection of life. The human being, the denial of his beauty, dread, power, in its insistence that it is his categorization alone, which is real and which cannot be transcended. Thank you very much. And our next reader is Shelly Marlow.
Hi, everybody. Reading from Oliver Sacks's Hallucinations, and I chose that because most of my main protagonists are hallucinators. Unlike him, they read meaning into the visions. I'll read from chapter 11 on the threshold of sleep. When Mr. Utter described so vividly are not dreams, but involuntary images or quasi-hallucinations appearing just before sleep, hypnagogic hallucinations, to use the term coined by the French psychologist Alfred Maury in 1848. They are estimated to occur in a majority of people, at least occasionally, although they may be so subtle as to go unnoticed. While Maury's original observations were all of his own imagery, Francis Galton provided one of the first systemic investigations of hypnagogic hallucinations, gathering information from a number of subjects. In his 1883 book, Inquiries into Human Faculty, he observed that very few people might at first admit to having such imagery. It was only when he sent out questionnaires stressing the common and benign qualities of these hallucinations that some of his subjects felt free to speak of them. Galton was struck by the fact that he too had hypnagogic hallucinations, even though it had taken time and patience for him to realize this. Had I not been asked before I thought carefully trying, I should have emphatically declared that my field of view in the dark was essentially a uniform black, subject to an occasional light purple cloudiness and other small variations, he wrote. Once he began observing more closely, however, he saw that a kaleidoscopic change of patterns and forms is continually going on, but they are too fugitive and elaborate for me to draw with any approach to truth. I am astonished at their variety. They disappear out of sight and memory the instant I begin to think about anything, and it is curious to me that they should often be so certainly present and yet habitually overlooked. Among the scores of people who respond to Galton's questionnaire was a Reverend George Henslow, whose visions, Galton wrote, are far more vivid than mine. One of Henslow's hallucinations started with a vision of a crossbow, then of an arrow, then a flight of arrows, which changed into falling stars, and then into flakes of snow. This was followed by a finely detailed vision of a rectory and then of a bed of red tulips. There were quickly changing images in which he reported visual association. For instance, arrows became stars, then snowflakes, but no narrative continuity. Henslow's imagery was extremely vivid, but it had no quality of a dream or a story. In Speak Memory, Nabokov provided an eloquent description of his own hypnagogic imagery, both auditory and visual. As far back as I remember, I have been subject to mild hallucinations. Just before falling asleep, I often become aware of a kind of one-sided conversation going on in an adjacent section of my mind, quite independently from the actual trend of my thoughts. It is a neutral, detached, anonymous voice which I catch saying words of no importance to me whatever, in English or a Russian sentence, not even addressed to me, and so trivial that I hardly dare to give samples. This silly phenomena seems to be the auditory counterpoint of certain pre-dormitory visions, which I also know well. They come and go without the drowsy observer's participation, but are essentially different from dream pictures, for he is still master of her senses. They are often grotesque. I am pestered by roguish profiles, by some coarse-featured and florid dwarf with a swelling nostril or ear, or at times, however, my photisms take on a rather soothing flu quality. Then I see projected, as it were, upon the inside of the eyelid, gray figures walking between beehives, or small black parrots gradually vanishing among mountain snow, or a mauve remoteness melting beyond moving masts. Next, we have No Land.
Hello. Hello. We're going to be honoring the one known as Bob Dylan. And I just wanted to start with this little text. I had already landed in a parallel universe with more archaic principles and values. One where actions and virtues were old style and judgmental things came falling out on their heads. A culture with outlaw women, demon lovers and gospel truths, streets and valleys, rich swamps with landowners and oilmen, Staggerlees, Pretty Pollies and John Henrys, an invisible world that towered overhead with walls of gleaming corridors. It was all there, and it was clear, ideal, and God-fearing, but you had to go find it. It didn't come served on a paper plate. Folk music was the reality of a more brilliant dimension. It exceeded all human understanding, and if it called out to you, you could disappear and be sucked into it. I felt right at home in this mythical realm made up, not with individuals so much as archetypes, vividly drawn archetypes of humanity, metaphysical in shape, each rugged soul filled with natural knowing and inner wisdom, each demanding a degree of respect. I could believe in the full spectrum of it and sing about it. It was so real, more true to life than life itself. It was life magnified. Folk music was all I needed to exist. Trouble was there wasn't enough of it. It was out of date, had no proper connection to the actualities, the trends of the time. It was a huge story, but hard to come across. Once I'd slipped in beyond the fringes, it was like my 6-string guitar became a crystal magic wand, and I could move things like never before. I had no other cares or interests besides folk music. I scheduled my life around it. I had little in common with anyone not like-minded. I'm closing the book on the pages and the text, and I don't really care what happens next. I'm going. I'm going. I'm gone. I've been hanging on threads. I've been playing it straight. Now I just gotta cut loose before it gets too late. I'm going. I'm going. I'm gone. She said, go and follow your heart. You'll be fine at the end of the line. Oh, let's go. It doesn't shine, don't you, when you want to love your fire. I've been walking the road. I've been living on the edge. Now I just gotta go before I get to the end. I'm going. I'm going. I'm gone. I'll overrate on guitar. And I'm Nolan. Thank you for having us. I don't know who's next, but they'll be great. Thank you.
Next up is Lanelle.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Nolan. That was amazing. I'm going to do a reading from The Normal Heart, which is a play, as many of you know, by the great Larry Kramer, the great late Larry Kramer, who was a villager and a villager through and through. Larry was a pioneering gay rights activist and author, and he made the village his battleground to galvanize historic changes in public debate around health. He was a founding member of the Gay Men's Health Crisis, and which was the first AIDS advocacy and support organization. I just want to say also that at the beginning of the play, as it's published, there's an important acknowledgement. And Larry wished that in every program, I'll just read from it. It says, it is the author's express wish that the following excerpt from W.H. Auden's poem to be included in all programs. And I just find it a fascinating thing that a lot of our villagers, who've made such great strides in this world, really crossed over with each other. They were friends or colleagues or admirers of one another. And so I'm going to read first W.H. Auden's poem. It's an excerpt from September 1, 1939. The windiest militant trash, important persons shout, is not so crude as our wish. What Mad Nijinsky wrote about Diaghilev is true of the normal heart, where the error bred in the bone of each woman and each man craves what it cannot have, not universal love, but to be loved alone. All I have is a voice to unfold the folded lie, the romantic lie in the brain of the sensual man in the street and the lie of authority whose buildings grope the sky. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. Hunger allows no choice to the citizen or the police. We must love one another or die. I also want to read really quickly a quote, which I think you will all find really interesting as I do. Quote, in American medicine, there are two eras, before Larry and after Larry. There's no question in my mind that Larry helped change medicine in this country, and he helped change it for the better. When all the screaming and the histrionics are forgotten, that will remain. Dr. Anthony Fauci in the New York interview by Spectre in 2002. So now I'm going to read to you a little bit from The Normal Heart. You think it's my good fortune to have the privilege of watching young men die? Yeah? What's the use? What am I arguing with you for? You don't know enough medicine to treat a mouse. You don't know enough science to study boiled water. How dare you? How dare you come and judge me? Dr. Juice, another idiot. And by the way, a closeted homosexual who was doing everything in his power to sweep all of this under the rug. And I vowed I would never, ever say that in public. How does it always happen that all of the idiots are always on your team? You guys have all the money, call all the shots, shut everybody out, and then operate behind closed doors. I am taking care of more victims of the epidemic than anyone in the world. We have accumulated test results, more data, more frozen blood samples, more experience. How can you not fund my research or invite me to participate in yours? A promising virus has already been discovered in France. Why? Why are we being told not to cooperate with the French? Why are you refusing to cooperate with the French? Just so you can steal a Nobel Prize? Huh? Your National Institutes of Health received my first request for research 2 years ago. 2 years ago. It took you 1 year just to print up all the application forms. It's taken you 2.5 years from my first reported case just to show up here to take a look. I mean, the paltry amount of money you are making us beg for from the $4 billion you are given each and every year won't come to anyone until God only knows when. Any way you add this up, it is an unconscionable delay and has never, never, never existed in any other health emergency during this entire century. While something is being passed around that causes death, we are enduring an epidemic of death. Women have been discovered to have it in Africa, where it is clearly transmitted heterosexually. It is only a question of time. We could all be dead before you do anything. You want my patients? Take them. Take them. And you're fucking right. I am imprecise and unfocused, and you are all fucking idiots.
Boom, Lanelle. Boom. Whew. Thank
Powerful
you.
writer, man. Powerful
Woo.
writer.
Yes, everyone. I mean, yeah, this is amazing. Okay,
Next, we have Ariel.
it's me. I am.
Go,
Oh,
Ariel.
thank you. I'm a little bit overwhelmed and also honored to share writing with you by the incomparable Lorraine Hansberry. When Village Preservation dedicated a plaque on her home at 112 Waverly Place back in 2017, I got to learn so much about this incredible person whose story has been told and retold and argued over in the decades since her death, though I'm guessing that the speculation began long before then. It feels a bit strange as a white person to read her words, as I would never presume to know what her experiences were like. That's why I chose to read this letter that she wrote to the lesbian publication, The Ladder, because these of her words and experiences I do feel personally connected to. I have heard some say over the years that Hansberry wasn't a lesbian because she was married to a man. I'm reading this as an answer to that assertion, and also because I'm guessing that Hansberry's writing about her homosexuality, that's her word, aren't as often read. To me, this could have been written yesterday. It's a bit niche, as lesbian magazines are, but I hope that it will at least be an enlightening window into a heck of a personal life. I have done a little bit of editing on this for brevity and clarity, because it's a letter in response to a few other articles that were published in The Ladder previously. So this is, so I will include the link to the full letter in our follow-up email. In her letter to The Ladder, this is dated August 1957, Lorraine Hansberry wrote, "Most of all, I wanted to leap into the very important bit on heterosexually married lesbians. I am one of those, incidentally. Speaking personally as well as abstractly here, may I ask, isn't the problem of the married lesbian woman that of an individual who finds that, despite her conscious will oftentimes, she is inclined to have her most intense emotional and physical reactions directed toward other women, quite beyond any comparative thing she might have ever felt for her husband, whatever her sincere affection for him might be? And isn't that the problem? How one quite admits that to oneself and to one's husband? A heterosexual woman of strength and honesty may, if she chooses, sever her marriage and marry a new male mate, and society will be upset that the divorce rate is rising, but there are few places in the United States in any event where she will be anything remotely akin to an outcast. Obviously, this is not true for a woman who would end her marriage to take up life with another woman. I suspect that the problem of the married woman who would prefer emotional, physical relationships with other women is proportionally much higher than a similar statistic for men, a statistic surely no one will ever really have. This because the estate of woman being what it is, how could we ever begin to guess the numbers of women who are not prepared to risk a life alien to what they have been taught all their lives to believe was their natural destiny and their only expectation for economic security? It seems to me that this is why the question has an immensity that it does not have for male homosexuals. We must take a dim view of anyone who treats a married partner without respect. But at the same time, I should imagine that we would have a particularly sensitive and sympathetic awareness of the nature of the social trap, I cannot think of a better set of words at the moment, which the fundamental position of women as a sex is likely to force many women into, homosexual or heterosexual. I am suggesting here that perhaps it is pat and even unfair to suggest that all that remains for the heterosexually married lesbian, already nursing her frustrations and confusions, is somehow to get rid of her self-pity and self-excuses and make a happy marriage without in any way denying her nature. I am afraid that homosexuality, whatever its origins, is far more real than that, far more profound in the demands it makes. Otherwise, it could hardly deserve to be called a problem at all. I don't think people start out in this world to be bad. They start out to be happy. Frankly, I haven't the least idea in the world what a solution to the question might be at this particular moment in history. But maybe that is what I was trying to say. Let us not get lost in answers which cannot possibly exist at the moment, but rather exhaust ourselves in the dissection of previous views. For instance, the whole realm of morality and ethics is something that has escaped the attention of women by and large, and it needs the attention of intellectual women most desperately. I think it is about time that equipped women began to take on some of the ethical questions which a male-dominated culture has produced and dissect and analyze them quite to pieces in a serious fashion. It is time that half the human race had something to say about the nature of its existence. Otherwise, without revised basic thinking, the woman intellectual is likely to find herself trying to draw conclusions, moral conclusions, based on acceptance of a social moral superstructure which has never admitted to the equality of women and is therefore immoral itself. In this kind of work, there may be women to emerge who will be able to formulate a new and possible concept that homosexual persecution and condemnation has at its roots not only social ignorance, but a philosophically active anti-feminist dogma. But that is but a kernel of speculative embryonic idea, improperly introduced here. Really love that letter. And I am very, very glad to pass this off to Penny Arcade. Penny, are you ready?
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I love, oh, here it's all, now it's disappeared again. I love the Greenwich Village Society for Historical Preservation. I smashed my phone and now I'm finding that my text just disappeared. While I'm finding my text, I will say that somewhere around 1959, as a young immigrant Italian girl in a working class town of New Britain, Connecticut, I saw James Baldwin on television. And this was a time when minority in America meant that you were Italian or Jewish, and we were considered non-white. So, you know, it pains me to 3 years ago to have watched while a professor at the new school was where they tried to fire her for asking the question to her graduate literature class why they might have thought that the people who made the film I Am Not Your Negro used the word Negro instead of the word that that James Baldwin used. And the white student reported her for hate speech for quoting James Baldwin. So, you know, I'm making this statement right now because I'm going to read James Baldwin if I can find whatever happened to my text on my, here it is. So at any rate, I'm not saying the title, but I have to say that watching James Baldwin argue with William F. Buckley got under my skin and made me see that I was not alone and I was not defined by my otherness when he said these words, which is, of course, I can't say that word. I'm not saying the word in protest, but I'm not saying the word because I don't want that bullshit following me. But what he said was, I am a man. I am not a N-word. But America, you have to ask yourself why you need an N. So this is from another country. They encountered the big world when they went out into the Sunday streets. It stared unsympathetically at them from the eyes of the passing people. And Rufus realized that he had not thought at all about this world and its power to hate and destroy. He had not thought at all about his future with Leona for the reason that he had never considered they had one. Yet here she was, clearly intending to stay if he would have her. But the price was high. Trouble with the landlord, with the neighbors, with the adolescents in the village, and all those who descended during the weekends. And his family would have a fit. A young couple came towards them carrying the Sunday papers. Rufus watched the eyes of the man as the man looked at Leona, and then both the man and the woman looked swiftly from Vivaldo to Rufus as though to decide which of the two was her lover. And since this was the village, the place of liberation, Rufus guessed from the swift, near sheepish glance the man gave them as they passed that he had decided that Rufus and Leona formed the couple. The face of his wife, however, simply closed tight like a gate. They reached the park. Old slatternly women from the slums and from the east side sat on benches, usually alone, sometimes sitting with gray-haired matchstick men. Ladies from the gigantic apartment buildings on Fifth Avenue, vaguely and desperately elegant, were also in the park, walking their dogs, and Negro nursemaids, turning a stony face on the grown-up world, crooned anxiously into baby carriages. The Italian laborers and small businessmen strolled with their families or sat beneath the trees, talking to each other. Some played chess or read L'Espresso. The other villagers sat on benches reading. Kierkegaard was the name shouted from the paper-covered volume held by a short, cropped girl in blue jeans, or talking distractedly of abstract matters, or gossiping or laughing or sitting still, either with an immense invisible effort which all but shattered the benches and the trees, or else with a limpness which indicated that they would never move again. And I was also asked to read Patti Smith, which is really funny because I'm 71 and kind of entering into the last phase of my life. And as a young teenager, as an 18, 19-year-old, I was good friends with Patti, and Patti had a huge influence on me as a person. And actually, as a writer, it took all of my 20s to get Patti's voice out of my head, not her poetic voice, but her actual speaking voice, because she copied Dylan. So every time she talked, it was like, so I writ something, and then like one of the things she often says when she sees me is, oh man, you look so young, you look so young. And one day I protested, and she was sort of stunned, and she said, well, you just worry about it when I stop saying it. So that voice was in my head for many years, and it was an incredible voice. She was an incredibly original person. And I'm thinking about how the postmodern world, which, once was associated with Bohemia, but now is its own crappy thing, always looks to find like another Patti Smith or another somebody, instead of looking for who's out there now. But the original Patti was like so unbelievably original. So it's fun for me to read Patti, and I'm reading from M Train. After a time, Zach places a fresh cup before me. "This is the last time I'll be serving you," he says solemnly. He makes the best coffee around, so I'm sad to hear. "Why, are you going somewhere?" "I'm going to open a beach cafe on the boardwalk in Rockaway Beach." "A beach cafe? What do you know? A beach cafe?" I stretch my legs and watch as Zach performs his morning tasks. He could not have known that I once harbored a dream of having a cafe of my own. I suppose it began with reading of the cafe life of the Beats, surrealists and French symbolist poets. There were no cafes where I grew up, but they existed within my books and flourished in my daydreams. In 1965, I had come to New York from South Jersey just to roam around, and nothing seemed more romantic than just to sit and write poetry in a Greenwich Village cafe. I finally got the courage to enter Cafe Dante on McDougal Street. Unable to afford a meal, I just drank coffee. But no one seemed to mind. The walls were covered with printed murals of the city of Florence and scenes from the Divine Comedy. The same scenes remain to this day, discolored by decades of cigarette smoke. In 1973, I moved into an airy, whitewashed room with a small kitchen on the same street, just 2 short blocks from Cafe Dante. I could crawl out the front window and sit on the fire escape at night and clock the action that flowed through the Kettle of Fish, one of Jack Kerouac's frequented bars. There was a small stall around the corner on Bleecker Street where a young Moroccan sold fresh rolls, anchovies packed in salt, and bunches of fresh mint. I would dare say that that was Mamoun's. I would rise early and buy supplies. I'd boil water and pour it into a teapot stuffed with mint and spend the afternoons drinking tea, smoking bits of hashish. Oops, did I disappear? No, I'm back. Smoking bits of hashish, oh, sorry, and rereading the tales of Mohammed Margaret and Isabel Eberhardt. Cafe Eno didn't exist back then. I would sit by a low window in Cafe Dante that looked out into the corner of a small alley, reading Marbet's The Beach Cafe. A young fish seller named Dries meets a reclusive, uncongenial codger who has a so-called cafe with only one table and one chair on a rocky stretch of shore near Tangier. The slow-moving atmosphere surrounding the cafe so captivated me that I desired nothing more than to dwell within it. Like Dries, I dreamed of opening a place of my own. I thought about it so much I could almost enter it. The Café Nerval, a small haven where poets and travelers might find the simplicity of asylum. I imagined threadbare Persian rugs on wide planked floors, 2 long wood tables with benches, a few smaller tables, and an oven for baking bread. Every morning I would wipe down the tables with aromatic tea like they do in Chinatown. No music, no menus, just silence, black coffee, olive oil, fresh mint, brown bread. Photographs adorning the walls, a melancholic portrait of the cafe's namesake, and a smaller image of the forlorn poet Paul Verlaine in his overcoat, slumped before a glass of absinthe. Thank you. Our next reader is Christy Raffensburg. Hope I said it right.
You did. So hi, everyone. I'm here at the library right now, and I don't normally do story time at 7 at night But it is appropriate because most of us have heard this story or remember this story as we were tucked up in bed with the lights dimmed low. So this is your bedtime story tonight. I'm gonna read Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown, pictures by Clement Hurd. In the great green room, there is a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of a cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs and 2 kittens and a pair of mittens and a little toy house and a young mouse and a comb and a brush and a bowl full of mush. And a quiet old lady who was whispering, hush. Good night, room. Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and the red balloon. Good night, bears. Good night, chairs. Good night, kittens. And good night, mittens. Good night, clocks. Good night, socks. Good night, little house. And good night, mouse. Good night, comb. And good night, brush. Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. Good night to the old lady, whispering, hush. Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. So grateful to all of you for being here and for sharing these beautiful words and songs and everything. Have a good night, everyone. Take good care.
night.
Looking
Take
forward
care.
to seeing you soon.